The courtroom air felt heavy, filled with the faint rustle of papers, the clicking of pens, and the occasional cough that echoed against the high walls. The wooden benches were occupied by a mix of tired faces, family members, lawyers, reporters, and those who had simply wandered in to watch justice being carried out. At the defendant's table, the bailiff guided in the next man. His entrance was quiet, almost invisible, as though he had grown used to blending into the background of life. He wore a tattered coat several sizes too big, the sleeves frayed and stained from years of wear. His shoes didn't match. One was a scuffed boot, the other a worn-out sneaker with its laces knotted together. His hair was gray, long, and matted, and his beard carried the roughness of weeks without proper care. Beneath the layers of neglect, his face bore lines not just of age, but of battles fought both on foreign soil and within his own mind. He walked with a slight limp, leaning on the table as he sat down, his hands trembling faintly. The whispers began immediately among the spectators. Some shook their heads, pity flickering across their expressions. Others rolled their eyes, dismissing him as another lost soul wasting the court's time. To them, he was nothing more than a homeless man charged with trespassing behind a grocery store dumpster, caught rummaging for scraps. His case was routine, unremarkable, and forgettable. But the man himself sat with a quiet dignity. His eyes, though lowered, carried a depth that went unnoticed by most. He stared at the scuffed floor, replaying in his mind the moments that had led him here. Nights spent curled under bridges, the bitter cold of winters, the hunger that gnawed at him until desperation pushed him into places he wasn't allowed to be. He knew what the world saw when it looked at him: failure, burden, outcast. Yet, behind those tired eyes lay a story no one in that room suspected, a story of honor, sacrifice, and bravery buried beneath years of struggle. When the clerk rose to announce his name, the sound cut through the murmurs. It carried across the courtroom with a weight that went unnoticed by most, but not by the man sitting high on the bench. The judge, pen in hand, paused as though struck by something sharp and sudden. The name echoed in the chamber, and for a split second nothing seemed unusual. The clerk's voice was calm, routine, no different from the dozens she had called before. But on the bench, the judge's hand froze mid-stroke. The pen he was holding slipped from his fingers and rolled across the polished wood, the faint sound louder than it should have been. His eyes, once dull with the repetition of cases, widened with recognition. It was a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years, a name tied to memories that still visited him in restless dreams. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he lifted his gaze toward the defendant. The man looked smaller than he remembered, shrunken under the weight of years and hardship. But the eyes were the same. They carried the same steel he had once seen in the chaos of war, when survival depended on courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. The judge's breath caught in his throat, his chest tightening as flashes of the past flooded his mind. The desert heat, the choking dust, the whistle of incoming fire, and the desperate cries for medics that never came soon enough. This man, standing in rags before him now, had once stood tall in uniform, his voice steady even when others faltered. He had been the one to pull him from the dirt, dragging him through gunfire when shrapnel had torn into his leg. The judge remembered lying helpless, sure his life was over, until those hands had grabbed him, refusing to let go. Without him, he would never have made it home. The courtroom remained oblivious to the storm raging inside the judge. Lawyers glanced at their notes, jurors adjusted in their seats, and the spectators whispered idly. No one else seemed to notice the silence that stretched longer than usual, or the way the judge's hands trembled slightly as he steadied himself against the bench. He leaned forward, his voice breaking the stillness, softer than anyone expected. "Sergeant," he whispered, almost to himself, the title slipping out instinctively before he caught it. The veteran's head lifted at the sound, confusion flashing across his face. His brow furrowed, as if trying to place the familiar voice. Recognition stirred slowly, buried beneath years of struggle, until it flickered in his tired eyes. The courtroom, unaware of the bond being rediscovered, watched curiously. Something unusual was unfolding, though they didn't yet understand. The silence in the courtroom deepened, strange and unsettling. The judge pushed back his chair, the wooden legs scraping against the floor, startling those seated nearby. Judges did not rise, not in the middle of hearings, not without cause. Yet here he was, standing slowly, his eyes fixed on the frail man at the defendant's table. A ripple of confusion passed through the room, even the bailiff frowned, uncertain whether to intervene. Step by step, the judge descended from the bench. His robe swayed slightly with his movement, his usually firm posture softened by something deeply personal. Every eye followed him, whispers growing louder until the bailiff barked for silence. The veteran, unsure of what was happening, looked around nervously, as though he were in trouble again. But then his gaze locked with the judge's, and time seemed to pause. Recognition washed over his face like a wave. His lips parted, trembling, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. He straightened as much as his weary body allowed and lifted a shaking hand, trying to form a salute. His fingers, stiff and weak, barely reached his forehead before falling back to the table. Still, the attempt carried more honor than any words could. The judge's throat tightened. Memories surged. Blood pooling in the sand, the frantic heartbeat in his ears, and this same man's voice shouting over the chaos, "I've got you, stay with me." The years between then and now seemed to vanish, and he was no longer a judge in a polished courtroom but a wounded soldier being carried to safety. Gasps echoed around as the judge placed a hand gently on the veteran's shoulder. No one had ever seen him this way, vulnerable, trembling, eyes misted with tears. The lawyers exchanged stunned glances, the jurors leaned forward, and the spectators sat frozen. The authority of the court had bent, not out of weakness, but out of something stronger: gratitude, respect, and debt that could never be repaid. The judge's voice broke the silence, soft but steady enough for all to hear. "You saved my life once. I never thanked you." His words carried more weight than any gavel strike could. The veteran's eyes glistened, his lips twitching into the faintest smile, though it wavered under the burden of emotion. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt remembered. The entire courtroom sat suspended in silence, the air charged with something far heavier than legal procedure. No one dared move, as though the slightest sound might shatter the fragile moment unfolding before them. The judge, still standing beside the veteran, drew in a long breath and steadied his trembling hands. His eyes swept the room, lawyers, jurors, clerks, all staring at him with bewilderment, waiting for an explanation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a depth no one had ever heard from the bench. "This man," he said, resting his hand on the veteran's shoulder, "is not just another case file. He is a soldier, a hero, and without him, I would not be standing here today." The words struck the room like thunder. The murmurs rose again, but softer now, tinged with awe instead of judgment. The veteran lowered his gaze, ashamed. "I don't deserve that, Your Honor," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "That was a lifetime ago. Look at me now." His hands twisted nervously in his lap, his shoulders slumping under the weight of years spent on the streets. He expected pity, perhaps dismissal, but what he saw in the judge's eyes was something else entirely: respect, undiminished by circumstance. The judge crouched slightly, forcing the man to meet his gaze. "Heroes don't disappear because life gets hard. What you did for me, it lives on, every day I wake up." His words shook with emotion, but his tone was firm, unshakable. Then, standing tall again, he turned to the court. "This man does not need punishment. He needs help." The prosecutor opened her mouth as if to object, but no words came. The defense attorney, stunned, nodded vigorously, almost relieved. Even the bailiff, normally stoic, looked down, his jaw tight as though he were fighting to contain his emotions. The gavel, which had always symbolized cold judgment, now came down with unexpected warmth. "Charges dismissed," the judge declared, "and I will personally see to it that this man is given the support he needs, a roof, a meal, and the dignity he has earned." Gasps and whispers filled the chamber, some wiping tears, others nodding in solemn agreement. The veteran's hands shook as he covered his face, overwhelmed. For years he had felt discarded, invisible to the world he once fought for. Yet now, in this unlikely place, redemption found him. The judge leaned closer, speaking so only he could hear. "You saved me then. Let me return the favor now." And for the first time in a very long time, the veteran allowed himself to believe that hope was possible again.